Sonoma State Dynasty Deep Dive, Part 4, the fourth and final part, where we're talking a little bit of defense. If you've stuck around for all of these, I sure do appreciate it. You're probably certifiably insane like I am, but thank you so much. Next video, Season 2, getting underway, but let's talk some defense before we do that, starting with a very brief history of football defenses. So defenses, they typically have to evolve after offenses, right? You can't solve problems that don't yet exist. So you see a lot more D linemen in the early era of football. If you're not familiar with how football defensive systems are numbered, I guess you would say, that first number you see is the number of defensive linemen, then it's the number of linebackers and number of secondary players. The 7-1-2-1, I'm not familiar with those 7-man line schemes, so I don't know exactly the differentiation of the 4 levels, but typically you have 3 levels, and it goes D-line, linebackers, and defensive backs. So think biggest players or players closest to the ball to smallest or players furthest away from the ball. But early on, you had those 7-man line defensive schemes. That was early on in the one platoon era, where the substitution rules were similar to that of soccer and rugby, where you had the same guys on the field the whole time, and once you were subbed out of the game, you were out either for I don't think it was the full game, but either the rest of the half or quarter. I think those slowly changed before they just went to open substitutions. But as the pass game really evolved, you saw more of the second and third levels, the linebackers and defensive backs, begin to develop. For the most part, linebackers first, and then the secondary, but somewhat interchangeable. The bottom 2 areas, so the part where it says linebacker versatility and secondary versatility, those schemes listed there, are the ones you're going to see most predominantly today. But I do think it's important to understand where the original thinking came from and how they evolved, because I think to a degree you always got to be looking back somewhat when you look forward. So moving on defense, I won't read all of that. If you want to, you can, but we got to change our mindset, because being innovative, especially defensively, I think requires a good amount of foresight as to what kind of things will happen on the horizon, and you have to find a way to kind of set your defense up to be ready to change when those changes come. So I think that requires the ability to see the game from a more zoomed out version, and I feel like that's a rabbit hole we could talk hours about, so I won't get too much in to what I mean by that. But a big part of scheme, right, and as much as, I'm making videos literally breaking this stuff down, I mentioned this in the offensive one, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, and honestly, over anything, I think it's about selling belief and selling what you believe in. And a video I actually saw in my Snapchat memories that reminded me of that was from the Joel Klatt show, I believe right after Mike Leach had passed away, and he was talking about an interaction he had with Mike Leach, and I'll put it in the video here so you guys know what I'm talking about.
More yards than what Mike Leach's running backs normally run for, and so I started asking him about is this some sort of evolution of your system, and is this something that we can expect in the future, where we're going to run for more yards? And he looked at me and he was like, Joel, you know me better than that. He was like, I don't call run plays. And I was like, wait. You what? And he says, I don't call run plays. He said, every time we hand the ball off, that's the quarterback checking to a run. And I stopped and I was like, hold on a second. You mean to tell me you do not call run plays? And he said, absolutely not. And I just, again, it was the level of belief in what he was doing offensively, and the willingness to totally be different. And I was like, so do you care about balance at all?
But my overall takeaway from it is that you gotta have a system that A, you believe in, and then B, you can sell your guys to believe in it as well. That's going to be more important than anything else. But we have, again, another fun name, because this is what we do. I think it makes it more fun. We have the 25 defense. You heard of the 46 defense, right? The 1985 Chicago Bears. If you're not a football person, that's kind of like the mythical, I mean, not mythical, because they obviously were a real team. That's like the golden standard of dominant defense. The 1985 Chicago Bears, they had the 46 defense, which I believe is the name of that is widely tied to their utilization of their strong safety, who was number 46. And we do have elements of that defense in ours, but we have the 25 defense, multiple based, meaning we run a mix of 4-3 and 3-4 fronts, and I'll get a little into how I believe you could / we would make that work as a defense. But a lot of over, tight, and bare fronts, I'll show those in just a second, but those are your most predominant, kind of best run-stopping defenses if you're looking at things in a vacuum. And the 25 comes from the fact that we want 2 true run-stopping D linemen and 5 linebacker types, and I'll get into what I mean by that, on all of our first and second down plays. And then when we get into our third down defenses, which is typically where you get into more specialized packages and some more unique looks, we always kind of want 5 linebacker types on the field. But base defense, 2 true run-stopping D linemen, 5 linebacker types. That's where I get the 25 from. We're going to use our fronts, so the things I talked about first, to stop the run, and then we're going to match personnel to stop the pass. And what I mean by that is if they have 2 wide receivers on the field, we're going to have 2 cornerbacks on the field. They have 3 receivers on the field, we want 3 corners on the field. They have 4 receivers, we want 4 corners, yada yada. You can't go beyond 5, but just wanted to articulate the point. And then we do use some 4-2-5 and 3-3-5 defense as well. That could be such a long discussion of how, those defenses have come about and fit into things. The short version is more defensive backs to account for the fact that offenses have been more spread out in recent years, have gone more to the passing game, so defenses want more speed on the field. And a great way to do that is to put 5 defensive backs on the field. I like, again, to match personnel for the most part, but when we get into games against stronger teams, I do like leaning into the 4-2-5 and 3-3-5 more as a base against 2 wide receiver looks, and then going into kind of our dollar or big dime defense against 3 receiver looks. I get if that gets confusing, but just wanted to note that in there, that's kind of something we mix in to account for teams when we're a little more outmatched, especially at the line of scrimmage, when you take on those much better SEC, Big Ten, those Super 2 schools, right? They're going to be a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot more physical at the line of scrimmage. As much as I want us to get as close as we can to them, we need to be realistic and be able to have answers for when we are a little outmatched. But continuing on, we want to run a heavy amount of sim pressure and zone pressures. And by that, I mean we are bringing a guy who isn't a conventional blitzer. So in typical defense, the guys lined up on the line of scrimmage are the guys who are blitzing and who the offense is typically accounting for as blitzers. And then if they have extra offensive linemen, which you typically do, right? Because most of the time there's 3 or 4 true D linemen on the field. And then when we get into different fronts, you start mixing in linebackers, yada, yada. Again, don't want to get too far off the point. But we're going to typically bring someone lined up at linebacker or in the slot. Again, that's that inside receiver position, the person lined up opposite of them, or a safety, someone else. We're going to add them in, and then we're going to mix rushing 5. So standard rush would be 4 guys are coming after the quarterback, 7 guys drop into coverage. A zone blitz typically has an extra guy blitzing, so anything with more than 4 guys rushing is typically considered a blitz. we're going to do that, but then we're also going to mix in dropping someone from the line into coverage. And that's why I say we want to play our 4-3 ends more like outside linebackers. And so predominantly the big difference between a 3-4 and 4-3 is in the 3-4, you're really using 3 truly big defensive linemen, and you would typically play what was called a 2-gap defense, where your D linemen are trying to hold up the offensive linemen across from them and are playing the gap both to the right and left of them, where the 4-3 was you play 1 gap, so you're just trying to beat your guy through the gap as quickly as possible. And because of that, the 3-4 typically had 3 true big D linemen. The 4-3 would have 2, true those run-stopping D linemen, and then 2 smaller ends. In the 3-4, they'll use their outside linebackers on the edge, and they'll essentially do kind of a sim pressure, although not really, they're lined up on the line, but one of them will blitz and one of them will drop. So that's one of the differences between the 3-4 and 4-3, and one of the things I want to do is incorporate more 4-3 looks, but still have that pressure disguise element you get in a 3-4. And I didn't put this on the screen, and this time, if you watched last year, I talked about how we wanted to be aggressive, and we've really evolved, and we want to be as aggressive as possible, and I will get a little more into that. But first, I wanted to give some visual looks as to what some of our fronts would look like. So top left, you see an overfront out of a 4-3. In the 3-4, an overfront on the top right. Bottom left, that is a tight front. So you have 3 linemen lined up inside of the tackles. Those guys lined up on the left and right. See how they're on the inside shoulder of the tackle? You would call that a 4-eye technique. And then the bear front is very similar. Just you're going to slide down that strong safety. So in the bottom right there, you see it goes N, T, S, and then SS on the far right. Yikes, that may have not been the best thing to say. But that is the difference between the tight and bear front and the predominant fronts you will see from us on defense. Now, different types of coverage. This has evolved. So the initial forms of coverage, or the ones that dominated for a long time, were man coverage and zone coverage. In zone, players are responsible for covering a certain area of the field. So you drop to that area, you're reading the quarterback's eyes and moving based on where he's looking. Man coverage, you're responsible for one specific receiver on the offense, and you follow him no matter where he goes. And then a coverage that's sort of a mix of both of those, essentially, if you wanted to get a quick definition, and one that's evolved more with more of these spread offenses and more vertical passing game, is called pattern match or split field coverage. They are technically different, but you can kind of group them together in that they both more so evolved or have become the predominant type of coverage in football today. And this is where players will play a specific receiver based on the distribution of routes by the offense. There's variations for different types of formations, trips, a trips right, tight end to the left, yada yada. There's a lot of different wrinkles you can do, but that's a good quick way to describe it. We are kind of mixing all 3 of those to play a little bit of a different type of coverage. I don't think this is completely unique, and in a way it's really similar to what a lot of match coverages are doing, but I call it spot, drop, and lock coverage. And so we play a lot of base 3 deep zone coverages, so cover 3, 3 buzz, which is where you start with 2 high safeties, and one of your safeties is going to come down into sort of the middle of the field, typically, once the ball is snapped. Tampa 2, that's where you're playing with 2 high safeties, and one of your linebackers is responsible for running with anyone going vertical in the middle of the field. And then cover 6 and cover 9, they're a little more complex. Cover 6 essentially is a combination of cover 2 and cover 4, so 2 plus 4 equals 6. And then cover 9 is the invert of that, so you're just flipping which side of the field you are playing each of those coverages, is the way I best know it. If someone has a better definition or way to differentiate those two, please leave it in the comments. Please enlighten all of us. We would love to learn. Or I at least would. I won't speak for you guys in the audience, but if you're watching it, I'd assume you're maybe somewhat interested. But anyway, the point of this is we can find matchups we like and play man against them. It also makes it easier for us to take away checkdowns and ensure we always have players trailing certain receivers, and it makes it easier for us to give support in several spots of the field. And so we're essentially playing base zone. We're going to take one guy out of that zone, have him play man against a certain receiver, and the tough part about the tough part about this is I have to customly make these plays essentially on the fly pre-snap. So I feel like that's some of the reason I'm not as motivated to try to, put the difficulty as high as possible. I want it to be in a place where we can kind of do some things and get creative and it plays realistically. And I feel like we found a good balance of that. But the big inspiration for us playing this style of coverage is I was listening to a podcast on Spotify called the Coach and Coordinators Podcast. And again, I was talking about how coverage has changed in recent years as offenses have changed. But one of the things I also talked about earlier is how you kind of have to look into the past sometimes to have answers for the future. And on this podcast, I believe it was an offensive assistant for the Miami Dolphins. I apologize for not remembering his name. But he was saying how in his off-season work so far, he's noticed, at least in some lower levels of college, higher levels of high school, you've seen a comeback of spot drop zone, which again is where you're dropping to a certain spot and then reading the quarterback's eyes to take away certain things. And so we're essentially combining that with that tweak of playing man against a certain guy. So it's kind of like a type of match coverage, kind of more zone oriented. And then obviously there's a little bit of man mixed in. So we're really taking all three elements of these predominant coverages or historically predominant coverages of football and putting a little wrinkle to it. And I don't think this is totally original. I'm sure teams have done this to some degree throughout the history of football. But this ties heavily to our use of sim pressures and 4-3 ends. This better allows us to kind of disguise some things. We can have guys on the edge match tight ends and running backs to take away quick alerts and checkdowns. And a checkdown is essentially a receiver who you throw the ball to when your initial read or reads are not there. He's typically out in the flat or underneath, close to the quarterback, close to the line of scrimmage, because the defense is going to account for the deeper parts of the field first. And I guess another one of the big reasons I kind of got to this type of coverage is that when we would zone blitz, it just gets so annoying when teams are just killing you to the flat because those coverages aren't great at accounting for that. And so by running sim pressures, we can get quarterbacks to kind of speed through their progressions, get the ball out quicker, and we can take away some of those quick throws, but still drop and not leave ourselves so vulnerable in the deeper parts of the field. And another inspiration for this is something I learned, I don't even know from what video, but it's a Bill Belichick principle where he simply will take his number one corner, and instead of having him follow the opponent's number one receiver, he has him follow the opponent's number two receiver, because that's more often going to be a matchup you can consistently take away, where in elite corner on an elite receiver, it's going to be a lot more 50-50. So his thinking is we'll put our number one on their number two, truly take him away, and then you would either rotate your coverage or have a pre-assigned double team to the opponent's number one receiver, and that more effectively actually takes away both options because a double team is going to be hard to beat. Again, super elite receivers can, but it's a lot harder. But then also, if you're rolling coverage towards a certain receiver, quarterbacks are typically taught to look to the opposite side of the field that the defense rolls their coverage to. So you'd then be encouraging the offense to look towards the matchup that they don't have a favorable matchup. That was such a terrible way of explaining that. I apologize. But I hope that makes sense. Spot lock and drop coverage, everyone. Let's go. This is our defense. Now, there's more than 11 guys here. These are more our defensive roles. So at nose guard, our guy over the center mostly, maybe a 0 to a 2-ish technique. DJ Dean, 6'3", 328, a sophomore. Deshaun Weeks is our defensive tackle, so either the strong side D-end in the 3-4 or, I won't get into everyone. But Deshaun Weeks, D-tackle, Joshua Townsend, D-end. Think of him more as a wide technique D-end in a 3-4. Could maybe go play the strong side end in a 4-3 if you needed him to. At linebacker, this is where I say linebacker types. So our edge linebacker is one who's consistently down on the line of scrimmage, most similar to a 3-4 outside linebacker. Our solid linebacker, think Sam linebacker, which typically associates to the linebacker lining up on the strong side of the field. I call it the solid because it is going to be the linebacker on the strong side in the 3-4 or your true Sam linebacker in a 4-3. The monster linebacker would be your true Mike in the 4-3 or kind of that weak side Mike linebacker in the 3-4. And then our walk linebacker is going to be someone who is the weak side outside linebacker in the 3-4, because the weak side you can kind of play around with just having a good athlete there, and then is going to be the weak side linebacker in the 4-3. So I call him the walk because in the 3-4, he's going to walk down to the line of scrimmage. And then our fifth linebacker type is actually technically our starting strong safety, Kai Riggins. So that strong safety position, I do really want someone that can play from the secondary, but work all the way down and be a part of the run game, can line up in the box a little more often, can again be part of that bear front and be part of the run game, but is also comfortable coming from essentially the top end of the defense, working his way down. And I guess the counter to that is on the walk linebacker, I want someone that can start down near the line of scrimmage and work his way deep and has the athleticism to go deep with more tight end and running back type players. Defensive backs, we're not really changing anything here, just straight up cornerback 1, Noah Collins, 82 overall senior. Jaden Bowie, our quarterback 2. Terrell Pace is our primary slot corner. Nico Solomon at free safety. And then again, Kai Riggins is more the starting strong safety. But then Josh LeBourne definitely gets a good amount of playing time. He's kind of our red zone free safety / big nickel, so 3-3-5 or 4-2-5 defense. Strong safety. And then again, since we want more of a linebacker type at that strong safety, I typically sub in a second true free safety in our true pass coverage sets. So more of our dime and our pass pressure heavy nickel coverage or nickel personnel looks. And that's Dakota Mills. He's not listed on here, but he's our second best true strong safety. Someone who almost could be more of a slot corner if we needed him to. But that is going to do it for the defense. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this makes it fun for everyone, kind of makes some things make some more sense as to why I'm showing what I'm showing in the Dynasty, why we're even doing this in the first place. I hope some pieces are coming together, and I'm excited to get back into some gameplay action in Week 1. We have a rematch with Hawaii. We're going to the islands this time. We owe them one. I'm not a big guy on revenge, but we definitely did not play our best game when we played them in Week 1 last season. So I would love to give them our best effort, and I'm looking forward to letting these new schemes get some show in Week 1, and I'm excited to see what the Seawolves can do in Year 2. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.